So he'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, he's a professor of chemistry here, and has spent a lot of time working with young people to solve a lot of the problems we've been talking about. So give him your ear, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about energy. Great, thanks.
Thank you, Katie.
All right, not the best clap session we've ever had.
You want to try that again?
Yes. Yeah, ready?
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, let's try that again too. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. So one of the arts of being a leader is to understand how to take a cue, and also to understand when you need to give back. So you're going to be giving back a lot today. So my name is Scott Auerbach. If you don't know how to say it, your back, my back, our back. A joke that I told so many times that my kids literally run to the nearest closet when they hear it. So I'd like to talk to you today, and we're going to actually have a conversation today about two of my favorite words, energy and leadership. And this is a two-way street or a many-way street. So let me just get your thoughts. Since I think you just had lunch, and after you have lunch, all the blood goes to your stomach, so you're going to try to bring it back up to your brain. Let me ask you, when you think about energy, what are the thoughts that come to your mind? Motion. Excellent answer. Anything else?
Power.
Power. Which is, how is that related to energy? Okay. So one of the tasks of being a leader is to collect questions. You don't necessarily need to answer them in real time, but you need to collect questions because some of those could be game-changing questions. So one question that we have on the table is, how is power related to energy? Let's keep that in our mind. Any other thoughts about energy? Yes, please.
Energy can either be created or destroyed.
Okay, so that means that all that we ever do with energy is we don't create it, we don't destroy it, we transform it. And so as a leader in the field of energy, we need to be thinking about the best ways to transform it. Yes, please.
Waste.
Waste. Exactly. So when we transform it, one of the consequences is some of it may go into a form that's not useful to us. So we have to be thinking about that as well. That'll be a big issue in the future conversation. Any other thoughts? Electricity. So energy, as we heard, can come in many forms. Electricity is one of those forms. And one of the issues that we have to think about as future leaders is what's the most important form? And then a corollary to that question is there a most important form? Or do all forms have the potential to be valuable? Okay. Any other thoughts? My second favorite word is leadership. Now, it's on the slide, it's right in the middle. It's sort of the essence, the gestalt, as they say, the crux of what you're doing over these couple weeks. But have you spent some time thinking about what leadership means and what it means in the context of sustainability? What do you think when you hear the word leadership? Education. Why does that strike you as being related to leadership?
Because when you're educated, it's usually by someone who has experience or knowledge, and you don't ask you to look towards them.
Okay, so the educator as the leader. Yes, please.
It means you have power.
I'm sorry, I totally skipped a step here. One of the things that I love is when you answer a question, you say, my name is, whatever your name is, and then you launch in. So your name is?
Avalon.
Avalon. Your name is?
My name is Marco.
Marco. Okay, Marco.
To be a leader, you have to have power and therefore responsibility.
Okay, power, responsibility. What are some other thoughts related to leadership? Yes, please.
My name is Jordan.
Jordan.
Influence.
Influence. Okay, now how is influence different from power?
Well, just because you have power doesn't mean, well, if you have power.
Not sure. Okay, so that's another example of a question. Remember, part of what we do is we answer questions. Part of what we do is we gather them for things we need to be thinking about in the future. So as a future leader, you need to be thinking about what is the difference between influence and power. Obviously, if they're different words, they have different meanings, but we have to think about what they are. There was a hand.
I was going to say...
And your name?
Oh, my name is Merlin, and I was going to say followers, because we need, like, followers to be a leader. We can't just
Right.
lead on our own.
We all can't be leaders, or can we? That's a question. It's an interesting question. Can we all be leaders? Yes, I'd like to follow that up.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think we can all be leaders, just be leaders in different things. Like, there can, I feel like there can be the leader, and then there's people that are special, like in a companies, there's people that are specialized in things. So like, they're leaders, but in their own section.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yes,
I think,
Marco.
yes, Marco. I think everyone can be a leader, but honestly not too many for one thing. There has to be one leader again for each group of, for each organization.
Okay, so what you've just done there is you, in a sense, created your own formulation of what leadership means to you. What are some of the characteristics of a leader? Yes, please.
My name is Cindy.
Hi, Cindy.
I think of vision first that a leadership has.
What is vision, other than the obvious?
I think it's like a goal. You know, you have to be able to see where you want to go and how you're going to get there.
Okay, so that's interesting. You just said two things. Let's think about, are they essentially the same thing? You want to see where you want to go, and you want to see how you're going to get there. How many people think those are essentially the same skill? How many people think those are two different skills? Okay. Now, there's often names, I think the conventional wisdom is, indeed, they are very different skills, and some leaders are particularly good in one. Some other leaders are particularly good in the other. For example, Steve Jobs, Henry Ford were thought to be visionary leaders. But they were aware of the fact that their ability, their knowledge in how to get from point A to point B wasn't that good. And so that's really about, so having a vision is more about strategy. Where do I want to go? And then knowing how you're going to get there is more about tactics. How am I going to get there? How do I break up this long journey into individual attainable steps? So when you think of yourself as a leader, you should ask yourself, am I a strategist? Am I a tactician? Or am I a blend of the two? And if you think of yourself, and let's say you have good knowledge of yourself, which is not easy to get. Let's say you think, I'm a really good strategist, but I have trouble breaking a big task into individual parts. Then as a leader, you better get somebody to work for you who's good at that other part. So it's really important that you don't think you're good at everything, because you're not. It's really important that you know where you're strong, and it's really important that you find people to complement your strengths. Okay, so that was really big picture about energy and about leadership. So I'd like to start, this is going to be a conversation with some slides, and I'd like to start by sharing with you my particular expertise. And I was recently in Cape Cod. How many people are from inside the the state of Massachusetts? Okay. How many people are from the western part of Massachusetts? How many people are from the Boston area? Okay. How many people are from California? None from California. Okay. New York City. Are you a Yankees fan? Okay, sorry about our extra innings lost last night. Okay, so wherever you came from, you used some energy to get here. And so that's going to be really the topic of the talk. But I'm going to start by sharing with you some sort of technical aspects of my particular expertise. So get ready for the technical stuff. So this is my scientific expertise. So the first area of expertise I have as a chemist is in the field of inorganic structures. And I have to admit, I just spent some time, family vacation at Cape Cod, so I'm going to express everything in the language of each. So this is an example of an inorganic structure. You know it's inorganic because this stuff here is, and the chemical composition of sand is what?
Rock.
There's often sodium in it, there's silicon, it's normally silicon dioxide. Silicon dioxide is the most abundant inorganic substance in the surface of the Earth. So there we have it, this is an inorganic structure. And actually one of the things that I study is using inorganic surfaces to convert biomass into biofuels. The other thing I study is the complement of inorganic structures, and obviously the complement of inorganic is organic. Very good. And so organic materials, so this is an example. These are a couple organic materials that I've been studying for a long time. But anyway, this is the organic material I'm really thinking of. That stuff right there is what? Seaweed. And the biggest component of seaweed is cellulose. And so cellulosic biofuels is one of the things that I study. Now, I'm a physical chemist. I'm actually what's called a theoretical chemist. What that means is when I was taking lab, I would constantly spill everything all over myself. Acid and benzene and carcinogenic substances. And it was obvious that this was not good, not healthy. And so the TA came over and said, Scott, there's this new field called theoretical chemistry. And that may be good for you. So that's where I went. And in the field of theoretical chemistry, what I do is I actually study the energy of systems by studying different molecular structures. This is an example of a triatomic molecule, 1, 2, 3, in potential energy wells. So you can think of a molecule as being in a potential energy well, and that describes the energy content of that molecule. And the way that we calculate potential energy wells is through what's called wave mechanics. So here we are experiencing some wave mechanics. So there you have it. That is my scientific expertise from the beach. Okay, so here's the outline of the talk. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a foundation of language, vocabulary about energy. What is it? How much do we use? Why are we worrying about it? How long have we been worrying about it? And then I'd like to talk about alternative forms. And you know there's many alternative forms. In addition to solar, biofuels, and fuel cells, there's wind, there's nuclear, there's geothermal, there's hydroelectric. There's all kinds of alternatives. Now, as a chemist, I'm obsessed with electrons and atoms. And electrons and atoms, that's a possible way to store energy. And so as electrons and atoms, these are the three most important alternatives. As a mechanical engineer, I might be interested in wind. As a nuclear engineer, I might be interested in nuclear. As a geoscientist, I might be interested in geothermal. So based on the expertise and the subjects that I fell in love with, that colors the kinds of alternative energies that I like to study. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about this ICONS program, which is in itself a leadership training program for future leaders of science. Okay, so the first question is, what is energy? And we've actually already heard it. We never really think about energy, we only ever think about energy transfer. And there are two forms of energy transfer, heat and work. Can anybody please describe for me the essential difference between heat as a form of energy transfer and work? Yes.
I guess heat is, you don't really use it, I guess, because you can lose heat. I'm sort of thinking about like an energy pyramid, how you lose like 90% of it. So I guess you can't really use the heat that you lose, but then the work you can.
Okay. So what you're saying is, in a sense, it's harder to use heat.
Yeah.
Okay, yes? Cindy?
Yeah, I think I may be really wrong here, but like heat isn't it transferred by contact, and work you also transfer by contact, but you have to like apply force to it.
Okay, so work is related to force. And by the way, Cindy said something in the very beginning. She said, I may be wrong here. And aren't we always maybe wrong here? Everything we say, except for 2 + 2 is 4, which is really like a definition. It's more like a poem that you've learned to say and everybody agrees upon. Other than that, there's a chance we're always wrong. But never let that get in the way of voicing your opinion. Okay? So thank you, Cindy. So yes, so there's an issue about work related to force. Yes, I'm sorry, your name is?
I'm Karishma.
Could you say that again?
Karishma.
Karishma?
I think heat changes the composition of something because it generally, like, when you have more heat, I guess it can destroy, like, connections between things, like in chem, like, I forget what it's called, like, bonds and stuff. But work, you work with the same thing, so I don't think it changes the composition of the things you work.
Okay. Yeah, so in general, I think it's fair to say that we tend to use heat more like, for example, when you want to melt something. You're obviously doing something to those intermolecular bonds. Where, like, if you had an ice cube, you could apply heat, melt it. If you like tried to get a good grip on it and rip it in half, you could probably do it, but it's going to be a lot harder. And I think that's getting to the part of what you're saying. And there is another hand.
Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Okay.
I don't know where calories fit into.
Okay. So in a sense, you've raised a question.
Yeah.
And where do calories fit into this? That's a great question. And I'd like to throw it to the floor to see if anybody would like to contribute a thought. Yes, please. I'm sorry, your name is?
Avalon.
Avalon.
Well, I remember learning about calories and how there's like 2 different types of calories. Like, well, there's like the regular number, it's like 50 calories, you know, but it's actually.
I'm sorry, when you're speaking, most of the people are there.
Okay.
So would you please, because I can hear you great.
I remember hearing about that there are like 2 types of calories. Like, not really, but there's like, you see normal calories, which is like 50 calories, but in a sense it's like actually 50,000 or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So when you see that your apple that you eat has 100 calories, you'll notice that it's a capital C. Capital C is a nutritional calorie, which corresponds in science to a kilocalorie. So that's true. So basically, nutritional calories are generally kilocalories, 1,000 calories. But is there another unit of energy that you learned about? Yes.
The joule.
Yeah.
The joule. That's right. And so the calorie is literally a unit of heat, and the joule is a unit of work. And it was thought at one point, before Professor Joule did his famous experiments, doing work that ended up heating things, that we now know that 1 calorie is how many joules? Anybody? I don't need the exact number, but anybody have a ballpark? Is it 0.1? Is it 1,000? Is it 4?
4.4 something. There's
4.184. So a calorie is 4.184 or if you're in a dark alley, gun to the head, how many joules in a calorie? 4! You're probably gonna live. Okay. So, that number 4 is something that you learned about in, it's just to you, when you learn about it in the first chemistry, it just seems like a number, another number that I have to, remember. But what you have to realize is that it was a transformative, it was a breakthrough to realize that work and heat are different currencies. So when you go to buy something, you use dollars, but when you go to Europe, you change currency to euros. Those are essentially the same thing. It's called cash, but they're different currencies. Just like calories and joules are different currencies, work and heat are different forms of energy transfer. And you can think of them as different currencies. In general, I can change the energy content of this car in many ways. In general, I can apply heat or I can do work. So if I do work, one way to do it is I just did a joule of work. Why did I just do a joule of work? What happened? Yes, please.
You apply force for a certain amount of distance.
I apply a force against what?
Gravity.
Gravity, exactly. I could also increase its energy by applying heat. Now I'm applying heat. The energy is increased. But there's clearly a difference. And the difference is the concept of, now I'm going to use the analogy of cards. When you have cards, you shuffle them. Shuffling cards, you're disorganizing. Applying heat is a way to disorganize the atoms of the card. When I do work, notice that all the atoms went up. That is organized energy transfer. So when you shuffle a deck, really there's one way to do it. It's called shuffle. And in that sense, there's only really one form of heat called heat. But when you try to organize a deck of cards, you could do it by color, you could do it by number, you could do it by suit. There's lots of different ways to organize, and for that reason, there are many forms of work. Mechanical work, electrical work, etc. Yes?
So does that mean heat increases, I think it's like entropy into like chaos because it's disorganized?
Exactly. Entropy, which is a fancy word and a fancy concept, is essentially related to heat. Yes, please.
Is consequence of the disorganizing through heat, does that make the material expand?
Sometimes it does, most of the time it does, sometimes it does not. When you heat ice, does it expand? And it forms liquid water, does it expand or contract? How do you know for sure?
Because the hydrogen.
No, how do you know for sure?
You take a measurement.
How do you know for sure when you go to McDonald's and get yourself an icy cold Coke? Where are the ice cubes in your Coke? Floating. Why is that important? Less dense. So that means that ice is less dense than liquid water, which means that when you melt ice, it actually forms a more dense phase. It contracts. So water is the classic, example, but it's this fact which makes people believe that water is crucial for life. Okay, so we now have a feeling that there's heat and there's different kinds of work. About a third of all the energy we use is in the form of heat. Heat to heat our homes, heat for manufacturing, and about 2/3 of all the energy we use is in the form of work. Lots of different forms of work, but by far the two most important are electricity, what we sometimes call power, I don't know why we call that power. It's just energy, but we call it power. Power is a completely different, physical unit. And liquid transportation fuels, whether it's gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel. So that gives you a sense of the fractions, but it doesn't give you a sense of the real magnitudes. And so let's think about that. So how much energy do we use as a planet? And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this to you in consumption rates. And it's that rate, just like if you ask how fast am I going, it's not miles, it's miles per hour. That's a speed. In this way, this is going to be joules per second. And joules per second, energy per time, is the definition of power. So we've just answered the first question that came to us. And the unit of power is called the watt, W-A-T-T, named after James Watt, the watt. And so the answer is, in the year 2008, the planet used energy at a rate of 15 terawatts. That's 15 and 12 zeros. So that's obviously a humongous amount of energy. And your task right now is to be properly skeptical and say, excuse me, Professor Auerbach, but I have no idea what that number means. Yes, Mark.
Is that per day or per year?
That is, okay, so let me ask you this. If you are driving
Yes.
50 miles per hour,
Yes.
can I ask you, is that per day or per year?
Per hour.
It's all the time. If you're driving 50 miles an hour and the highway is clear and there's nothing to slow you down and you set cruise control on 50 miles per hour, then can I ask you, is that per day, per year, per week? It's all the time. This is a consumption rate all the time for the year 2008. Obviously, 2009, the economy, 2008, 2009, the economy weren't so great, so those numbers might be different from 2012. But for that period of time, this is the rate. Okay, now, your job is to try to understand this. And as a leader, if you can't understand it, shades. Nice. As a leader, if you can't understand it, you have to be relentless in your search for wisdom. Remember that knowledge can be conveyed, wisdom cannot be. So that means that you have to construct this knowledge for yourself. If I tell you 15 terawatts, if that doesn't make any sense to you, then that's not good enough. So one way that we might make this number make sense is to say, well, let's divide that by all the people on the planet Earth. And so we have a number per person. And then you might say, yeah, it still doesn't make sense. So then you might say, well, let's break this up into how many 100-watt light bulbs would be burning all the time for every single person on the planet Earth. And this number turns out to be using energy at a rate of 20 100-watt light bulbs for every single person all the time. Does that number strike you as big or small?
Big.
Marco says big. I'd like to hear some other voices. So, what do you think? I'm sorry, your name?
I'm Amelia.
Hi, Camelia. What do you think? Does that number strike you as big or small?
Big.
Okay. So, when you think big or small, nothing is big or small in a vacuum. It's big or small compared to something else. So when you think of that as being big, what in your mind are you comparing it to?
Like the amount of light bulbs in my house.
Okay, so the amount of light bulbs in your house, that is a logical comparison. But let's ask the question, is it a complete and thorough comparison? This is all the energy usage in the planet Earth, including all the manufacturing, all the jet planes flying all the time, all the flat screen TVs running, all the cars driving, all the trucks, all the nuclear power plants, everything. So now, with that in mind, is 20 100-watt light bulbs for every single person, big or small. let's compare it to something else. Let's compare it to usage in the United States. The USA used energy at a rate of 3.3 terawatts, which is a little bit more than a fifth, but it has a population of something like a 20th. So that corresponds to every single person burning 100 watt light bulbs all the time. Guess what's the first thing I did when I saw that number? I turned off the lights while my kids were doing homework, nonetheless. They were thrilled. So now you get a sense of the difference between the developed world and the world on average, and why countries like India and China seek to develop. And indeed, it is estimated that by the year 2030, this number will increase by 30% precisely because India and China, which are well behind this number, would like to become developed countries. And so that raises the question, where is all that energy going to come from? And in general, it raises the question, where does our energy actually come from? So here's the number for 2008. Here's the graph. And the thing that should shoot out at you, well, let me ask you, what do you think shoots out at you when you look at that? Marco, you've done a good job so far today. I've heard you. You've done well. I'd like to hear from some others. Thank you very much. Yes, your name.
I'm Tyler.
Hi, Tyler.
Oil, gas, and coal.
Oil, gas, and coal. So what shoots out at you about that?
How much we're using.
Okay. And what's special about oil, gas, and coal?
They're not great for the environment. And yeah.
Okay. So they have an environmental impact. And what's another issue about oil, gas, and coal? Yes, please. Your
My
name?
name is Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin.
They're not renewable, so eventually we will run out of them.
Yeah.
And then there's just going to be that big hole.
Right. So, I agree with you, Tyler. That's the thing that shoots out at me, that they have an environmental impact and they're non-renewable sources. So in this talk, there are 3 slides that are big, fat, complicated slides. And the next one is one of those big, fat, complicated slides. And as a future leader, and I'm actually reminded, I'm a big fan of the whole, Star Wars thing. And I remember in The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke fights Darth Vader for the first time. And Darth Vader congratulates Luke on the fact that he's been taught well because he's controlling his fear. And that's actually one of the things of being a leader, is when you're faced with great complexity, is the typical human response is a fear response. Holy shit, look at all that stuff. And your job, just like Luke's job, is to control your fear, take in the information, and I will walk you through this. So a slightly more complicated version of that is shown here. This is an energy flow diagram that is put out by the Department of Energy. And what it shows is all the different sources of energy, what they're used for, and eventually what's actually used versus what is wasted. And also, part of your task is to be able to look at something like this and really distill out what's important. Do you need to memorize every single number? Of course not, but you need to come away with a message. So here, first of all, a comment about the numbers. The last bunch of numbers we saw were energy usage rates in numbers like terawatts. These are completely different. And that's one of the things that you, as thinking about energy on this planet, you're going to have to get used to the fact that there's different kinds of units. These are units of what are called quads. A quad is a quadrillion British thermal unit. Anybody know what a British thermal unit is? Well, British thermal, we get a sense that thermal is an amount of heat. That's a hint. So it's the amount of heat. British means it's old-fashioned units. It's not kilograms, it's not meters, it's not seconds. Those are the SI units. It's things like pounds and degrees Fahrenheit. So it is precisely the amount of heat required to heat up a pound of water a degree Fahrenheit. That is a British thermal unit. And we, in this country, during the year 2009, used 94.6 quadrillion of those. And at the end of the day, what's the crucial piece of information here? The crucial piece of information is that the number is close to 100, which means the numbers on this graph are approximately percentages. So you don't have to worry so much about what a quadrillion British thermal unit is, but you do have to notice that these numbers are approximately percentages. That's the first hint that we'll be able to understand this. Now you may not be able to read this, but it says solar, nuclear, hydroelectric, wind, geothermal, natural gas, coal, biomass, and petroleum. And obviously the magnitude of the source of energy is related to the thickness of the line. In the middle here is how this energy gets used, and at the end is whether the energy is wasted or not. So the first thing that shoots out at me is, because black is a pretty strong color, is most of coal is used to make power, to make electricity. And when we look at the number, remember I said that about 1/3 of all the energy we use is to make electricity, so that 1/3 would be about 33, it's about 38. And then here's transportation fuels, that's about 30, and then this is essentially heat right here. So most of the coal is used to make electricity. Most of the transportation fuel comes from petroleum. And another thing that shoots out at me is if we move all the way to the right-hand side. This is the amount of energy that we use. This is about 40% of all the energy that we use actually is achieving its goal. Lighting lights, making trucks go, making choo-choo trains go, making all the stuff go. About 55 to 60% of the energy that we use is wasted, and it's wasted as heat. Exactly. So as an energy scientist, you pretty much can work on the left-hand side here and try to increase the size of this pie, especially the renewable sources. So I work on solar energy and biofuels as a way to make solar is 0.1% of all the energy that we use. That's all. We want that number to be bigger. Whereas if you work on this side, what you're doing is you're trying to minimize the amount of energy that we waste. It doesn't mean you're trying to find new sources of energy. You're going for more energy efficiency. Which is more important? New sources or energy efficiency? I hear energy efficiency. Any other thoughts? Your name, please?
Jordan.
Jordan?
I think energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency. Okay, so why do you say, why do you say new sources?
I said energy.
Oh, you said energy efficiency. Okay, so we have two saying energy efficiency. Yes?
I say new sources.
New sources. Okay, so why do you feel that?
I say new sources because if we find a new way to produce energy, then we do need to know how to make it efficient, but that way we won't need to know as much to make it efficient because we'll have a different way to make it.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be already efficient because it's different from what we already do. It won't be fossil fuels, so it'll be efficient.
Okay, so you're assuming that if it's not fossil fuels, it'll be more efficient.
Yeah.
Anybody have a thought on that? If it's not fossil fuels, it'll likely to be more efficient. Yes?
I don't think we'd look for an energy source that would be less efficient. Even if we found one, I don't think we'd use it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just not plausible.
Well, what are the two big problems with fossil fuels? I'd like to, yes, your name please?
I'm Nicole.
Hi Nicole. What do you think are the two biggest problems with fossil fuels?
Well, one is that it's it has an impact on our environment.
Environmental impact, and then
It's gonna run out.
it's going to run out. So if we could find a renewable form of energy that didn't have those two problems, and if it were a little less efficient than fossil fuels, would we consider it? That's a question on the table. Okay, so so at the end of the day, there are, this is the amount of energy that we really care about. And there are two equivalently important ways to increase that. One way is to waste less, and the other is to get access to more. Both are equally important. And it's up to you to decide what kind of research you want to do, what kind of impact you would like to have. Both are equally important, because at the end of the day, you think of all of this as different kinds of currency. And all that's important is that we have enough of this stuff to do the stuff that we like to do. Okay, so we now know that 80% right now comes from coal, oil, and natural gas. And actually about 2/3 of it, it's maybe a little bit less now, about a half, is imported, and imported from countries like Saudi Arabia, and maybe, I don't know if we import any from Venezuela, but anyway, we don't necessarily get it from countries that are our friends. So that's an issue too. And then there's the question, is it going to run out? We've already heard the answer to this today, but let's put it on the table. Is coal, oil, and natural gas going to run out? Yes?
I'm Caitlin. It will run out because at the rate that we're consuming them, it takes more time to produce them. I mean, it's basically compacted for millions and of years to be able to use these sources for fuel, and we don't have millions of years to sustain us to make it renewable.
It's also running out of landscapes. We've already destroyed most of the our sources, like mountains and coal mines. So.
Yep. Tyler, you have a question? You're just...
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah, so at the end of the day, look, the Earth is a finite, sphere. And we're using it at a rate that far outstrips the normal geological timescale for actually making it. So yes, absolutely, it will run out. The only question is when. So here's some interesting quotes. The question of the possible exhaustion of the world's oil supply deserves the gravest consideration. There is every indication we are face to face with this. Anybody guess when this quote was made? Yes?
1930.
1930. What makes you think 1930?
Sounds like something Winston Churchill said.
Okay, Winston Churchill. Any other thoughts? Yes.
1970s.
1970s. Okay, good. Before you were born, but nonetheless not too far back that you know that there was an oil embargo. And so when I was a kid, there was a gas station down the road, and there was either a green flag, meaning we got lots, a yellow flag, meaning we have some but not much, and there would be long, long lines, or a red flag, meaning we don't have any. And when that happened, people pretty much freaked out and started making statements like this. This statement happened to be made in actually 1913. And in fact, we've been worrying about oil running out for a very long time. I'm going to skip the next one. We have, for about 100 years, thought that we've had 40 years worth of petroleum. Huh? How does that make sense? For 100 years, we have thought we had 40 years worth of petroleum. How can that be? Yes?
I'm Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Isn't the idea that we will never actually run out, but it will become more and more impractical and time and energy intensive to gather the resources needed? And also, I think that we keep readjusting because we discover
Yeah.
We discover new technologies to remove oil, and we discover new places where we didn't think oil was.
Right, so we're constantly finding new. And so if you put yourself in the shoes of an oil company, you want to find oil, you want to sell it, and it's incredibly expensive to explore for new sources of oil. Incredibly expensive. So as a company, you want to minimize your costs and maximize your profits. And what the oil companies have found is that when the known reserves fall beneath about 40 years, that's when it's time to spend some money to explore for some new. And most of the oil that we have found, it's true that it's not from new wells, it's from either adjusting our estimates of what's in existing wells or coming up with new technologies to extract from those wells. So the issue of we will never really run out, it'll just become impractical. I think we all agree, perhaps we do, that whatever the supply is, it's a finite amount, because the earth is a finite thing. And what will probably happen is, as the supply really dwindles, the cost of that dwindling oil will skyrocket. And as that skyrockets, other technologies will come in to replace it. And then there will be just oil wells just deserted. And there will be some oil left in those wells that we're not going to care about because we have like dilithium crystals and stuff. So I think you're right about that, but we have to come up with those new, technologies. Okay, and then there's the environmental impact, climate change, and we tend to only think about climate change in one variable, and that's temperature. But there is another more dramatic climate change, and there are some people who are still arguing about temperature. Carbon dioxide has gone up from 280 ppm to 380 ppm and rising. The temperature of the Earth has gone from about 280 Kelvin to 280.7 Kelvin. Think about that. I'm going to say that again. CO2 has gone from 280 to 380. Those are two really different numbers. And the precision of the measurement is really sufficient to be able to make it clear those are two different numbers. The temperature in Kelvin, Kelvin is important because it's absolute, is from 280 to 280.7. That's a little teeny tiny change. And we're not exactly sure about the error bars. Is it plus or minus 0.5, plus or minus 1.5? If it's plus or minus 1.5, global warming could be global cooling. And that is the essence of the controversy to the extent that there is one. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I will say that there's a whole other variable that is incontrovertibly changing, and that is called the pH of the ocean. And that's also climate, just for fish. And that is definitely dropping, because CO2 goes into the ocean, reacts with water, carbonic acid, and that's your acid. pH is dropping. So there's no doubt about that. So when you put together the 30% increase from the development of India and China, the fact that we get most of our crude from unfriendly players, the fact that we know how to make gasoline from coal, but it's more expensive because coal is a solid, and the incontrovertible climate change, and you put all of this together, hello, how are you? You put all of this together, and you, in your own mind, have to decide, is there an energy crisis? And nothing that I say after this will matter if you believe that there's not an energy crisis, and that's up to you. You have to come up to your own decision. So let's take a couple minutes to really discuss this. Is there an energy crisis right now or not? An energy crisis, yes. Yes, please. And please feel free to address the crowd.
I don't think there's an energy crisis as of right now, because honestly we have energy and like multiple different types of energy. We just choose to for like the easiest one and the one that's most convenient. It's more of the environmental crisis that's a bigger issue. The fact that like the aftermath and the consequences of the energy that we're using right now.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, please.
I would argue there is an energy crisis because should we choose to continue using the amounts of coal and oil and gas we are using at the rate we're using them, things are going to get problematic real quick. And I think if we don't even though we're looking in the short term, it doesn't look like there's going to be a problem. If we look long term, if we don't change now, it's going to have more lasting effects down the line.
Okay. Yes, please.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. One thing that's really important is to develop the skill. If you hear something that you think doesn't sound quite right, is to respectfully, politely, but logically criticize. So it's not all that you're responding to what I throw out on the table. You may also respond to each other. And you're going to have to get used to that. And it's important to realize that if you're criticizing, you're not criticizing a person, you're criticizing an idea. So don't take it personally, please.
I think there is an energy crisis.
There is or there is not?
There is.
There is.
But it's more the fact that we have right now, but when you think about it, once we run out, like what are we gonna do? So I feel like the crisis is now because people are starting to think about the future and like what are the future generations gonna do if we run out of energy. There are other forms of energy, like everyone said, but like we're not using them. Like there's not like the percentage of people using the other types of energy is just so small that it's not really affecting like that much because there's just everything is powered by fossil fuels and like not environmentally friendly like, energy. So it's only the people who are using it, they're helping, but it's not like enough.
Okay. More thoughts, please? Yes, please.
I agree with you, Ron. I think that there's an energy crisis, but I think the energy crisis is specific to the type of energy that we're using. And if we use the other types of energy that are more efficient, then I think the crisis would no longer be a crisis. It's just a certain energy that we're using that is in crisis.
Okay. Any more thoughts? What are your thoughts on this, Cindy?
I think that like as of right now, I agree with people who spoke about this. We don't really have one right now currently, but I think on the track that we're going and at the pace that we're heading, we're definitely gonna have one in the near future. So we should be worried about where we're headed in our progress.
Okay.
I think we have enough energy. I think it's just the way we're using it. I think we're being very wasteful with it, like leaving lights on, not leaving the water running. I think people just need to change their habits to
Okay.
sustain.
Okay.
And like overconsumption, for
Yeah. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer to this right now. That's one of the issues about working on a field where there is no right or wrong answer. You have to come to your own decision and you have to then act on that. And act on that means to pursue studies that will help you to have the impact that you think needs to be had. I'm going to share with you my particular opinion on this. And be very careful to take this with a grain of salt. It is not your opinion, although my wife likes to joke she has her opinion and I'm entitled to it. So, my feeling is that at the end of the day, we have an energy problem, both because of the fact that 80% of the energy we use is non-renewable. India and China are trying to develop, and the environmental impact. So the combination of those three. So it's not just an energy problem, it's an energy environmental problem. But there is an energy relation to it because most of our energy is not from a renewable source. But I also agree that there is plenty of energy out there. Solar energy, for example, more energy hits the surface of the Earth from the sun in an hour than we use the whole year. So there's energy out there, but our problem is that we don't know how to harness it. And so I believe that there is a problem, and that's the essence of it. But again, that's my opinion, not yours. Okay, so based on my opinion, I'm going to share with you 3 different kind of technologies. And oftentimes you'll hear somebody say, solar energy, that's the answer. Back in the day, there was a movie called The Graduate, and the answer in that movie was plastics. Plastics are the answer. Now people say solar energy is the answer. I don't know if you heard about RFK Jr. I don't know if that name is at all meaningful to you, but he came to campus and he really said solar energy is the answer. I happen to not believe that solar energy is the answer. I believe that all these different forms will contribute. Nuclear even will contribute. Wind will contribute. Geothermal, hydroelectric, biofuels, fuel cells, solar. They're all going to contribute in their own proper kind of environment. If you're in the desert, biofuels are not the answer. Solar is. If you're in Iowa cornfield, then it's probably, biofuels. So that means that we have to learn about all of these different kind of technologies. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is to realize they all have pros and cons. Pros and cons. And as a nuanced thinker, there's no such thing as good or bad. It's not this thing is good or bad. It's that you have to realize these are pros and cons. Which means, given the pros and cons, there's a situation where it can be a good solution and a different situation where it may not. Okay? So starting with solar, there's a huge amount of energy coming to the Earth. As I said, more energy hits the surface of the Earth in an hour than we can use all year long. So there's boatloads of energy. The problem is capturing it in an efficient way. Also, it's completely carbon-free. It's just basically photons. There's no carbon there. Of course, you could argue sustainability. Here's this a sustainability kind of issue is, well, yeah, the photons don't have carbon, the electricity doesn't have carbon, but the manufacturing of the solar panels and the distribution of the solar panels, we're probably using some fossil fuels there. You're absolutely right. And so what would be great is if we used biofuels instead. The cons. At the end of the day, these panels are expensive. And so what does it mean to be expensive? Really what it means is what's the cost of the energy in kilowatt hours? And so you see coal is at the bottom. Actually, to be honest, things have switched. I made this talk about a year ago. Things have switched. Natural gas is now cheaper. Natural gas is cheaper, but they're both down here, and here's solar. Solar is really expensive, and that is a really prohibitive thing. So I want to give you a feeling. First of all, how many people here have solar panels on their house? Okay. When did you get them? Jeremy?
They were on the house when we got it.
Okay, good. So you were lucky. That's the best kind of solar panels to get, is they were on the house when you got them. Typically, one of the problems with solar panels is the issue is, are they good or bad? No, no, no. The issue is that they suck photons, convert it to electricity. That electricity you give back to the grid. You save money. But it costs money to put them on, maybe $20,000. So ballpark, how long does it take to recoup the investment? That's the question. And is that time a big time, a long time, or short time? Anybody have a guess how long it takes to recoup the investment from so about $20,000. About how many years does it take? 15 years. Well, I'm sorry.
20.
15 to 20. I'm sorry, your
Sarah.
name is? Hi, Sarah. 15 to 20 years. I would say that's about right. That's consistent with what I've heard. And now we have to ask the question, is that a long or a short time? And as we learned before, we have to compare it with something. So what's a reasonable comparison number? I'm sorry?
Like your lifespan?
Your lifespan, okay. So if you're lucky, you'll live more than 15 or 20 years, so that's good. But then you have to ask yourself, is that the most relevant one? So it's possible to find a number, but it may not be the most relevant one. Yeah, Kate?
I had a non-time related comparison of
Yeah.
how much in tax dollars you pay to subsidize fossil fuel use. I don't know if that's a good example or comparison.
Well, but what you have to do is you have to put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. So here I am, I'm trying to put food on the table, trying to keep my kids in clothes and send them to college. I have a limited amount of money. Am I going to take this chunk of money that I was going to put into the college fund and put it on my roof instead? And am I going to get the return on investment? And so what is the lifetime I should be thinking about to compare to this 15 to 20 years?
If your kids aren't born yet, you can still get the money back to send them to college.
So the hint that I was trying to give you is, Jeremy, did he put the solar panel, did his parents put the solar panels on his house, on his roof, or were they there when they bought the house? They were there when they bought the house. So it comes down to, on average, how long do people own their home? On average, you own a home for 7 years before you sell it and move. 7 years. Way less than the 15 to 20. Yes, Sarah, did you want to say something?
But then, like, solar panels add value to the house. So they're gonna get
They do add value to the house, but not enough to get your investment money. Because Jeremy and his family really won out when they bought the house with the panels on it. Sort of like the house with the pool. You know, it adds value if you love to swim. Right? So anyway, the bottom line is that's the problem. And if we could shrink that 15 to 20 years down to 5 or 6 years, that's a game changer. Because now, on average, people will live in their house for at least as long as it takes to recoup the investment on the panels. So why is it so hard to recoup the investment on the panels? Here comes the next cool slide. So this gives you a history of solar energy research from 1975 to the present. And the x-axis is time, the y-axis is efficiency, meaning that all the energy that hits the panel is used to make electricity. And so right now, back in the olden days, you know, we were in 1976. Notice 1976, so people were worrying about energy in the 70s because of the OPEC, you know, embargo. So the number is like 1% or maybe 9%. Now they're all the way up to about, say, 42%. So if there's 42%, why is anybody even doing research on this stuff down here? Yes?
Maybe those are cheaper.
Maybe these are cheaper. Maybe these are wicked expensive. Maybe those are the solar panels on the station, where they're out in space and they need to collect every single molecule of energy that they can. So those are a little expensive and they're not practical to put on your roof. And in fact, the sweet spot is right here. So commercial solar cells are made of crystalline silicon. Remember, I said that sand is silicon dioxide. That's not what this is. This is pure silicon. So what you have to do to make a solar panel is take sand, take the oxygen out of it, which is extremely difficult and expensive, and get crystalline silicon. So that it has to be just so, and that's why it's so expensive. Now the other question is, if this is the sweet spot, then why is anybody doing research down here? What would make this a good option if it's only 6% as opposed to 25%? Yes.
Building that doesn't need that much energy, like,
But if you could put this on, you get 4 times the amount of energy, which means you return on investment 4 times faster. If you had a choice between these and these, all of the things being the same, would you pick these or would you pick those? So, I'm sorry? Did somebody say something? There is a thing I said that you have to question because you're constantly questioning everything that, all the words that come out of my mouth, take with a grain of salt. The key thing, all other things being the same. These are really, really cheap. They are made of plastic. Plastic solar cells. Yes.
They're like the ones on the little solar-powered toys.
Yeah, exactly. They are plastic solar cells. And the amazing thing, the concept of plastic solar cells, they're flexible, but what's more important is you can paint your house with a solar panel. It's not just the roof. And you can, some people don't get solar panels because they're ugly. Well, what if you can paint every surface of this campus with a photovoltaic material? So the problem is they're not efficient enough. And when this gets to about 10%, and people are working doggedly to get these plastic photovoltaics up to 10% efficiency, that's a game-changing technology. The question is not if, but when. And guess what one of the world's leading centers for research on this is? The University of Massachusetts. So we are experts in working on this. In fact, this company here, Konarka, is a Massachusetts company founded by a UMass alum. Okay, so now what we want to do is, so we have a sense, we have the space shuttle, we have commercial, we have the future. This is really the future. And when we get efficiency to this line, then the concept of solar panels will dramatically change. Yes?
What are the solar panels for the space shuttle made of?
Okay, so these are made up of, let's see, purple gallium arsenide. So gallium arsenide and silicon are both what are called semiconductors. So you need semiconductors, and I'll actually show you in the next slide why you need to have a semiconductor. So this gives you a picture of how light, so light basically in the form of particles of light or rays of light impinges on this, and it gets excited, it gets absorbed. By absorbing light, it excites electrons, and so it's like this. Here is a plus charge, here's a minus charge. What do they do? Do opposite charges attract or repel?
Attract.
Opposites attract. So when it absorbs light, it gets into an excited state that looks like this. Now, guess what happens most of the time to this excited state? That is what happens most of the time.
that hurt.
A little bit. And so we've just converted light into heat. Not very useful. So with an efficiency of 25%, that happens 3 out of 4 times. But 1 out of 4 times, what happens is this excited state dissociates into a separate charge that's minus that goes up here and plus that goes down there. And once you do that, you've converted that photon of energy into a usable electricity. The reason why you want this to be a semiconductor, so there's 3 kinds of substances: a metal, a semiconductor, and an insulator. An insulator conducts no charge. That's not very good. There has to be some conductivity. A semiconductor conducts a little bit of charge, but if a little bit is good, shouldn't a metal be even better? Imagine if you had a bunch of minus charge up here and a bunch of plus charge down there, and you had a metal in the middle. What would happen? They would all recombine. So that's why what we're looking for is modern semiconductors. Silicon that goes into computer chips is a semiconductor. Gallium arsenide is a semiconductor. And we're looking for new organic semiconductors. Okay, so I'm going to skip through the details of this and go on and oh, by the way, when do I need to stop?
So I think we're at about 2 o'clock right now.
Yes.
They'll have free time at 3, so you're welcome to run over. Whatever
Okay.
works, the next half hour or less.
Okay,
Up to you.
so obviously I've talked about energy, I've talked about solar. I still want to talk a little bit about biofuels. Is that okay? You want to hear about that? Okay, good. Okay, notice I have exactly the same picture. Why do I have the same picture? The same picture as for solar. Why would I have the same picture for biofuels? Yes.
Because they can work together.
Okay. Yes.
It's the same house uses biofuels, but you can't see them.
Where do biofuels come from? Yes.
The trees and like the plant
Plant matter. So, photosynthesis. In the last slide, I talked about the physical mechanism by which solar energy is converted from light to electricity. Biofuels utilize photosynthesis. It's essentially solar energy. Except instead of using a solar panel and converting it directly to electricity, photosynthesis converts light into what? In what form? Glucose. Glucose. Plants have evolved to convert light into, they take in, notice plants take in CO2. Internal combustion engines throw out CO2. Plants take in CO2. They take in water. They take in energy of light. And through evolution and a very complicated sequence of different reactions and different enzymes, produce glucose. And then they take these glucose molecules and form them into chains called cellulose. And the cellulose is the major component of cell walls of plants. It's the most abundant biological polymer on the earth. So, while we're thinking about solar energy here, we're thinking about the energy locked in all that cellulose as another form of solar energy. Now, this has pros and cons. Why? Because everything has pros and cons. By the way, I used to play a cool game with my kids. We used to play the pros and cons game. So I would throw out a situation, and they would come up with the pros and cons. And you might think that's really like, what? But it's actually, sometimes it's hard. Like there are some, situations that seem all good, but actually they have cons. And there are other situations that seem all bad, but actually those can have some pros. So it's sort of a mindset almost to view every situation, no matter what situation it is, it has pros and cons. And different kinds of energy is in that as well. So biofuels have pros and cons. The biggest pro is that growing fuel crops is in a sense a natural way to sequester CO2. Growing the fuel crops is sucking the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and it's carbon neutral. To give you and we use the phrase whenever we talk about biofuels, we say it is in principle carbon neutral. And the in principle is because of the fact that we make biofuels today, and for all the processing, we're using fossil fuels. So the question is, how much biofuel energy do we get out compared to the fossil energy that needs to be put in? Right now, that ratio is anywhere from 2 to 8. In principle, it will be infinity when we run out of fossil fuels, and we only have biofuels. And the way that this is carbon By the way, I just also wanted to mention, sometimes people talk about carbon positive, carbon negative, carbon neutral, carbon free. 4 different things. Solar, carbon free. No carbon. Biochar, where you take char and you plant it in the ground as a fertilizer, is in principle carbon negative. Because you're taking CO2, forming char, planting it in the ground. That's carbon negative. Carbon positive is pretty much our entire way of life. That's carbon positive. Carbon neutral is essentially biofuels, where we grow fuel crops, and it doesn't necessarily have to be trees, although in some cases it might be trees. It could be in Brazil, sugarcane; in Iowa, corn; in Maine, it could be lumber. It could also be genetically engineered, switch grasses, mustard grasses, all kinds of different ways. But in principle, we grow some kind of fuel crop that gets converted through some kind of refinery into fuels for transportation, char maybe for fertilizer, etc. That goes into, and then it goes into an internal combustion engine. And people always ask me, does bioethanol have the same carbon footprint as normal ethanol? And the answer is ethanol is ethanol. So the answer is yes. So what's good about bioethanol? The answer is we go around this cycle. There's a cycle where the carbon, the CO2 that gets released into the atmosphere from the internal combustion engine eventually gets soaked into a future fuel crop. So that's why this is in principle carbon neutral. Are there any questions about that? If you don't completely understand it, I would love to see, because you have to completely understand it. Yes?
I just have a question about, so you could have like field crops, and how do you take the energy created, like by fuel crops, to turn it into energy?
That's a great question, and we actually don't have the answer for that right now. That's the essence of the kind of research that I do. So I'm happy to share with you our present thoughts if you wait a slide or two. That's a great question. There is another hand. Yes, I'm sorry, your name?
Yeah.
Okay.
So are you cutting down forests instead of using lumber and
Right.
Massachusetts to make biofuels?
Right, so that's the question. Are you cutting down trees so we can drive our cars?
Yeah.
And that's a great question. And the answer is probably not. What we're probably doing is using things like waste wood, wood pulp, and my favorite, municipal solid waste. Do you all know what that is? Municipal solid waste? Poop. Poop. Poop, if you think about it, it's insoluble fiber. What do you think fiber is? Cellulose. So the solid matrix, let's call it, of poop is not that chemically different from cellulose. And so if we could only use municipal solid waste, which by the way nobody wants, as a source of energy. People have been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. So anyhow. Okay, so pros. Growing fuel crops is a natural way to capture CO2. It's really the only kind of renewable source of liquid transportation fuels. And it's a huge business for agriculture. So it's not just about the science and the environmental, it's politics too. To make it happen, Congress has to enact laws, which means that they have to be incented to do that. And there's this big thing in the middle of the country called the Midwest, where they have a lot of farms. And so there's a great political interest in biofuels. The cons, because everything has it. A study was done in 2005 to ask the question, if we grew fuel crops on every surface of this country that we could, and we didn't take away any of the food that we use and the feed for cattle, or also the grain that we give tons and tons of grain to all over the world. if we didn't impact that, but just grew crops everywhere we could and used that to make biofuels, what percentage of our liquid transportation fuels could we replace? And the answer turned out to be about half. And it is so funny, because I tell that to some people, and they say, well, it's only half. That's not enough. We shouldn't do it. And then I tell it to other people, and they say, as much as a half? Let's do it now. And so you have to decide where you fall on that. If it's only half, is it worth doing it? Or if it's as much as a half, isn't that a significant fraction? So that's a question. Then there's the really important question about if we're talking about growing crops, you know that most biofuels today come from corn. What has that done to the price of corn? What has that done to the price of all food? And why is corn impacting the price of non-corn food? Yes, please.
Is everything has something made out of corn in it?
Like what?
Corn syrup.
Corn syrup. It's astonishing when you pick up an item at the grocery store and you read the ingredients to find corn syrup in practically everything. So that's one reason. What's another reason? What do we use corn for?
Popcorn.
What's that?
Popcorn.
Popcorn, yes, exactly. What are some other organisms that eat corn? Yes?
Animals.
Cattle. So we give a lot of corn to cattle, and we eat a lot of Big Macs. So anyway, at the end of the day, what's happened is cellulosic ethanol from, corn ethanol has increased the price of food all over the planet. That's from a energy standpoint, that's fine. From a sustainability standpoint, it's not fine. Because sustainability is also about, it's the three, what are the three stools of, or the three legs of the stool of sustainability? We need to worry about environment, economy, social justice. If we don't have a solution, what's the problem?
I guess correctly.
You guessed correctly.
Yeah.
Environment, if we screw up the environment, it's not sustainable. If it's not economically viable, it's not sustainable. If it doesn't involve social justice, it's not sustainable. And the problem with corn ethanol is it's not sustainable because of economics and social justice. So let's see, what I want to do is I want to give you a feeling. What do we do right now? We take corn, we smash it up into corn grain. We use various methods to convert that corn grain, which remember is essentially starch. Starch is a chain with lots of sugars. Break that up into the sugars, ferment the sugars to make the fuel. Now, we make about 5 billion gallons of this per year. In 2007, Congress passed a law, the Energy Independence and Security Act, mandating that we would make 36 billion gallons. That's an increase of a factor of more than 7 by the year 2022. 2022 is like right around the corner. Right now we're making 15 to 18 billion gallons, and the demand on corn is at an all-time high. We can't press the system anymore. This is a classic example of Congress mandating the impossible. Just because they make a law doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's corn. I'll sign a sheet of paper. Wow, look, there's all this extra corn. No, that's not how it works. So that means that corn ethanol is just a piece of a larger puzzle. And one of the things that we've done at UMass, by the way is also one of the world's leaders in biofuels, is to try to put together our sense of what this puzzle is. And so here it is. So this is the biofuel puzzle. And so corn ethanol is obviously just a piece of that. And we don't want to be making it just from corn for the reasons that we said, because coupling of food markets and fuel markets is going to make people very hungry. So what we want to do is we want to use all kinds of waste, corn stover, agricultural waste, straw, and in the etc. is, of course, my favorite, municipal solid waste. So this is one of the areas of research that we have here at UMass. But actually, ethanol is not the best fuel. There's two important reasons why ethanol is not the best fuel. Does anybody have a sense of what those are? Has anybody ever heard of beer? Beer is a mixture of mostly, what's the biggest component in beer?
No.
Thank goodness it's not alcohol. Water. Water. Alcohol comes in second. And that alcohol is precisely ethanol. So the first problem is that ethanol mixes with water. You don't want to put water in your gas tank. So after you make the ethanol, you have to separate it from water, and that costs money. The second problem is that the energy density of ethanol is only about 70% that of gasoline. And so at the end of the day, really what you want to do is you want to convert all this stuff into gasoline. You want essentially to convert a substance like this, so cellulose, directly into gasoline. And so you ask the question, how does that work? And so I'm going to quickly share with you the answer. What we're doing is we're studying what's called catalytic fast pyrolysis. Catalytic, I'll get to that in a second. You know what fast is. Pyrolysis, pyro, I think you know what pyro is. It's heat, fire. Lysis means to cut. So it means to break down the cellulose by rapid heating. I'm talking 1,000 Celsius per second, rapid heating. And what it does is it takes this fiber, breaks it up into tiny molecules. Then those go into a vapor. They go into the middle of an inorganic catalyst made of silicon dioxide. So now we're getting to the silicon dioxide finally. And this is exactly the same kind of catalyst that takes crude oil and converts it into high-octane gasoline. Why not use exactly the same catalyst to convert biomass-related vapors into high-octane gasoline? And so this is the kind of research that I do. I do computational research onto different kinds of catalysts that will make this happen, and then the 5 or 10 most promising leads I hand off to my colleagues who actually make them in the lab. So it involves rapid heating and this what's called a nanoporous catalyst. By the way, the fact that this is a nanoporous catalyst means this is an example of nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is the application of a nanoscale structure to do something that you want to do. Okay, so fuel cells, we're really kind of out of time here. So if you're interested in fuel cells, send me an email. Okay? I'd like to tell you about icons, and I'm going to run through this somewhat quickly. Icons is, which stands for Integrated Concentration in Science, is really about the fact that when you come to college, how many of you are planning to go to college? Good. Excellent. When you go to college, you're going to find that maybe if, and how many of you are interested in some engineering or science? Okay. So you're going to find choices like chemical engineering, biology, geoscience, but you're not really going to find renewable energy as one of the majors. And so what we thought is that, okay, these are sort of big problems. This is what people need to be studying now. And these are areas of strength at the graduate level here at UMass. We do research in energy, in clean water, in biomedicine, and in climate change. People need to be able to study these things at the undergraduate level. Not as a major, but as a concentration. And I'll share with you what that means. So the idea is that For example, if you think about biofuels, you need to understand the biology of plants. You need to understand the chemical engineering of how to do this catalytic fast pyrolysis. You need to understand the physics of how all these particles are interacting in the mathematics. Who knows all that stuff? Is there any one person who's an expert in all this stuff? And the answer is nowadays, no. Everybody specializes. And if that's the case, how can we ever make progress in these problems? Our answer is teamwork. So we take a biology major, a chemical engineering major, a math major, and a physics major, and put them in teams and get them working, not opening up a textbook, but opening up a newspaper and reading about today's problems and drilling down into those problems. So the mission of ICONS, which I think this will really resonate, is to produce the next generation of leaders in science and tech with the attitudes, knowledge, and skills that you're going to need to solve these multidisciplinary problems. And there's one word on here that is different from what you might see in a typical mission statement, and that's the word attitudes. There's an attitude shift here. One attitude shift is you have to be willing to work on problems where the answer is not in the back of the book, because nobody has the answer. You also have to be willing to work with other people, different perspectives, different attitudes, but somehow make the whole greater, the team. There's a difference between a team and a group. You have to get that team to be able to work. So the way this is a typical major in college is anywhere from, say, 60 to 70 out of the 120 credits that you need to take. ICONS is not a major, it's a concentration. Think about the major as the cake. ICONS is the icing on the cake. And so what it is 18 credits where you work on case studies, lab work, and research. And the four essential things here is that you're working, as I said, you're opening up the newspaper, working in multidisciplinary student teams. You're engaged in student-driven learning, meaning you open up the newspaper. We don't tell you how to address a problem. I'll give you an example. Cholera in Haiti was one of the case studies that we worked on last year. Some teams looked at that as a biotechnology problem. I want to study the genome of the cholera bug so I can track how it spread. Other teams said, I don't care about how it spread, we just need to boil the water. Because they've got 1 million Haitians in all kinds of refugee camps. They can't boil the water. That's why they're getting sick. If we could just boil the water, if we studied, for example, if solar heating could disinfect water, then that would be a way to address the problem. So different teams addressing problems through their own interests. And at the end of the day, you're getting expertise in real-world problems, leadership and teamwork experience, communication skills. Communication is very difficult when you're working on an unsolved problem, working with people from different majors. Now you start this, the cool thing about ICONS is so often you guys will go to college, you'll want to work on these problems, you're going to be told, no, I'm sorry, you didn't really know enough to start working on it, go back to class. In ICONS, you start working on these big problems as a freshman in college. Go all the way through, and also you get the benefit of not only being mentored, but acting as a mentor. So I just want to leave you with some, for lack of a better word, inspirations that have helped me to do my own work and have helped the ICONS team to do what we're doing. So the first one is education is not filling a bucket, it's lighting a fire. So as you go through your education, if you find that your fire is not lit, something needs to change. A genius is someone who makes every mistake once. So don't be afraid to make a mistake as long as you learn from it. So often, the way that you're taught is you have to take this test, and if you get something wrong, it's points off, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to make mistakes. That's the way you've been taught. It's the only way you really learn. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. Speaks for itself. And my favorite one, the greater danger is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. So take home message, whatever you're going to do, go for it.
do you have time for a couple questions, Scott?
Sure do.
Great. Does anyone have any questions?
Please.
If society ends up transferring to a future where we're running almost completely on renewable energy sources, what do you see as the biggest changes we'd have to undergo, or do you think we'd be able to end up living the same lifestyle we are living now?
Okay, that's a great question. I'd be happy to share with you my thoughts, but I'm really much more interested to hear the thoughts of your classmates. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to throw that to the table, because I think it's a really important question. Would everybody like to hear it again?
Okay. If we end up in a future where we're running almost completely on renewable energy sources, what do you think will be the biggest changes we see in how we live and how we run our lives, or do you think we'll end up living the same way we're living now?
Okay.
I'll just well, if we convert to and are dependent on renewable resources, I feel like because of where we are now, there's going to be a lot of waste. Because we have millions and millions of cars already that run on gasoline, and all this technology that runs on non-renewable resources, and it's just where we're going to put that when we are now dependent on renewable resources. So I feel like it'll be a little dirtier, but it's kind of an investment. Like in the future, it'll just turn out right. But yeah.
So you're saying there's going to be a transition period?
Yes.
That may have some problems. Any other thoughts? Yes, please.
I think that I don't think that that's gonna happen because I guess we're not gonna stop using those things. I feel like we're just gonna adjust the way we use them and how we get them to work. I think, but I feel also like the ideal is to still have that power and electricity to be able to do all the things we do on a daily basis, but just with renewable energy sources. So it'd be ideal to have everything work the same, but I don't think it's gonna happen like that. And I do agree that there's gonna be a period where people are probably people will go crazy and stuff, but they'll just in the end I think it would work.
Can I actually, because I think this is really important, and I wonder if I can ask to clarify the question, if that's okay. Are you asking Tyler if you think that in order to get to a renewable, sustainable kind of societal lifestyle, are we going to have to sacrifice? Are we going to not be able to have guaranteed lights on whenever we want them, and not be able to drive as far as we want to or we could afford to? Or are you asking a different question about the transition from where we are now to where we could be, and what needs to happen for that transition to finally take place?
First one sounded good.
The first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're really talking about impact on quality of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think thinking of changing quality of the population's life, for example, in the United States, is possible because people are used to their lifestyle and they won't want to give it up very easily.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people just saying you can't use a car today because it's consuming too much gasoline isn't really possible. So
Yeah, we heard from our vice president in the early 2000s that we have a God-given right to drive SUVs. So, yeah, Sarah, you wanted to share something.
Yeah, I just want, I agree with what everyone's saying. I think that we can, I guess, technically do it. I think we were talking about with an attitude change. I think that needs to happen, and I think that goes along with making sacrifices, and that might not necessarily mean that we like don't have access to cars, but just that we shouldn't use them as much, and so that attitude change, that lifestyle change that would make everyone better off anyways, even if we have the technology. I think it's coupled with a value and sort of like how we think and interact with others.
Well, let's make this really concrete. Let's say
Yeah.
that in the year 2070, it's time for my summer vacation and I feel like driving to San Francisco. What's going to be different that's going to make me rethink that? Yes, please.
I think one of the biggest sacrifices I would have to make is that I think geography is going to play a much larger role in how we obtain our energy, because it depends on like where you live. But if you live near the coast, for instance, you know you're going to base more of how you obtain your energy on wind power rather than geothermal power. So I think that things aren't going to be as standardized as it is now, since everyone's getting it from, mostly everyone's getting it from fossil fuels. So no matter where you are in the country, things are going to be the same. But then in the future, if we have to base it on renewable energy sources, it might vary depending on where you live, because I believe that where you live definitely determines how you live.
Okay. Yes.
I personally think that if by, as time goes on, as it becomes, for lack of a better word, becomes more cool to have the greener house, I think that one by one, as more people do it, I think that slowly things will change into the transition period, and that it won't be in your head to take a road trip, or even if it was in your head, your friends would be like, oh, that's not cool. You should totally find a safer and more ecologically friendly way to do that. Or maybe there'll be cars already out there that are carbon neutral or something like that, that run on cellulose, so you can just kind of feed the cars or something.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this issue? Question on the table. Will we have to sacrifice our quality of life? Yeah, Sarah?
And I think it's in the question also, what is quality of life to us? How has that changed over the years, and how are we going to define it in the future? And do we have an excess the luxuries that we have, are those necessary for a basic quality of life for everyone?
Yeah, I think that's now getting a little bit to the heart of the matter, is that this is an institute about sustainability. Sustainability, remember we said it has these three legs: environment, economics, and social justice. And if you think about it, how does it force you to change the way you think? How does it change the way you perceive the world? How does it change your attitude about what quality of life means? Until I think you wrap your arms around this question, I think you haven't gotten there yet. Yes?
Could you just give a really brief pro and con about what you think about wind energy?
Pro and con about wind. I would say that the biggest pro about wind is its availability as a technology. You don't need fancy plastic photovoltaics. You don't need this catalytic fast electrolysis, which we know how to do at the bench scale, but not at a country scale. So I would say the technology, now my mechanical engineering colleagues might beg to differ, maybe they wouldn't, but I would say that the technological development is quite mature. I would say the con is very simply the magnitude of the energy available, as opposed to solar, where we receive from the sun. I said this 3 times, I'll say it one more time. We receive from the sun every hour all the energy we need for the year. So that gives you a sense of the magnitudes of things. Wind energy, there's just much less of it. And obviously, it's a geographical issue. Some places are windy, other places are not. By the way, the places that are windy, guess what likes to fly through those places?
Birds.
Birds. Do we count them into a social justice, sustainable solution? I think we probably need to. So we probably shouldn't put the wind turbines in the windiest areas, maybe in the half of windiest, areas. So I think the biggest pro is that the technology is relatively mature. The biggest con is simply the magnitude of energy available.
Great, do we have one last burning question for Scott?
Burning question. Did you get that?
Fun. All right.
Got to be subtle here.
All right, hey, do it again. Anyone?
I got one.
All right.
Okay.
We've been hearing about these algae fuel cells for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
10 or 15 years at least. Is that a realistic technology, or is that just still bench scale, never gonna happen?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that. I can tell you what I know about algae as a promising kind of biomass. The good thing about algae is it's the fastest growing biomass in the world. That's the pro. Faster than anything. The downside is it's really sopping wet. So it's expensive to transport. And you have to spend money to dry it out. A lot of people are interested in algae related biofuels. So taking that algae and just like we said with municipal solid waste or switchgrass or whatever, converting it into biofuels, and there's research being done on that on this campus as well. The fuel cells and algae-based fuel cell, I don't even know how that works. In general, just so we're all on the same page, a fuel cell addresses not the source of energy, but the utilization of energy. When you think about, for example, taking coal, most of our electricity comes from coal. The coal is simply burned. The burning of the coal heats water into steam. The steam turns a turbine, which moves current around a magnetic cable, and that makes the electrons, high energy electrons. So it's essentially burning, and every time you burn, then you convert steam, water to steam, you've lost some energy. You turn a turbine, you've lost some energy. You move electrons, you've lost some energy. You lose most of the energy. So the great thing about a fuel cell is it doesn't tell you where the fuel comes from. It could be an algae-based fuel cell, a hydrogen fuel cell, a methanol fuel cell. There's all kinds of different fuels. But what the fuel cell does is it takes the fuel, converts it into electricity without burning anything. And instead of it being like 10% efficient, it can be 80% efficient. So that's the good news. How it works with algae, I don't know. And by the way, let me just share with you that when I got my PhD, I was a little nervous. And somebody said, why are you nervous? And I said, well, now that I have a PhD, I'm supposed to know everything. And they said, no, you're not. You're supposed to say when you don't know. Because now that you have a PhD, people might believe you even if you're talking out your ass. So it's really important, if you know, to give your opinion, and if you don't know, to say, I don't know. Yeah.
You just described a coal fuel cell, but if the only reason the turbine turns is because of the steam from heating the water, can't you just heat the water using something else?
Yeah, but the problem is that, okay, so you need two things. A, you need to worry about the cost of the thing that you are using to heat the water. So you need to worry about cost. And coal and natural gas are super cheap. And then you need to worry about the efficiency of the process. And so that process is pretty technologically mature. So we're probably not going to make the progress that we need to by having a more efficient process of, turning it. And we probably don't have the feedstock that we need and the magnitude that we need to generate the electricity that we use. And so that's why going away from this kind of burning kind of technology to a fuel cell technology is why that's really important.
All right, guys, can we give Scott one last round of applause? Okay, so as you mentioned, Scott, is it okay if we have anyone who has lingering questions, if we could bundle those maybe and send those to you?
Yeah, let me give you my card or hand out some cards if that's okay.
That's perfect.
And people